What if one of the greatest civilizations in human history did not suddenly rise from kings and temples, but from footprints left in the mud tens of thousands of years ago? Before Angkor Wat pierced the sky, before Khmer kings ruled with divine authority, before the name Cambodia was ever spoken, who lived on this land? Where did they come from?
And how did ordinary humans, hunters, farmers, survivors, lay the invisible foundation for an empire that would one day astonish the world? To understand Angkor, we must travel far deeper than temples. We must go back to a time before history, before writing, before memory itself. The land before a nation. Long before borders, flags, or names, the land we now call Cambodia was already ancient.
Situated between the Mekong River, the Tonle Sap Basin, and the dense forests of mainland Southeast Asia, this region was never an empty wilderness. It was one of the most life-sustaining landscapes in Asia, shaped by monsoon rains, fertile floodplains, and vast waterways. Between approximately 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, migrated into Southeast Asia. Archaeological evidence across the region confirms that early humans rapidly adapted to tropical environments, mastering fishing, hunting, and forest survival. In Cambodia, sites such as Lang Speen Cave in Battambang province reveal human occupation dating back to the late Paleolithic period, around 10,000 BCE, with signs of earlier activity. Stone tools, hearths, and food remains testified to continuous human presence. These early people were not primitive wanderers. They were skilled survivors who understood seasons, animal behavior, and the rhythms of water and land. From hunters to settlers. As the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, the climate stabilized, forests expanded, rivers deepened, and the Mekong River system became one of the most productive ecological networks on Earth. Gradually, human life changed. By roughly 4000 to 2000 BCE, communities in mainland Southeast Asia, including present-day Cambodia, began transitioning from mobile hunter-gatherer societies to permanent agricultural settlements. Rice cultivation emerged through long experimentation, particularly in floodplain and wetland environments. Early farming did not replace fishing or hunting. Instead, it complemented them. Archaeological evidence shows a mixed economy that ensured stability and food surplus. With surplus came population growth. With population growth came social organization. Villages formed, traditions solidified, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The birth of a people, before the Khmer name. At this stage, there was still no Cambodian identity as we know it today. However, linguistic and genetic evidence reveals the roots of the future Khmer people. The ancestors of the Khmer belonged primarily to the Austroasiatic language family, specifically the Mon Khmer branch, one of the oldest language groups in Southeast Asia. These peoples were indigenous to the region, spreading gradually across mainland Southeast Asia long before later migrations of Thai-speaking or Sino-Tibetan groups. They lived in kin-based communities, deeply connected to land and water. Their beliefs centered on ancestor reverence, nature spirits, sacred mountains, and rivers, ideas that would later merge seamlessly with Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. This ability to absorb and adapt new beliefs without losing core identity would become one of the defining characteristics of Khmer civilization. Water, the first sacred power. Long before Angkor's massive reservoirs and canals, early inhabitants understood a fundamental truth: water is life. The Tonle Sap Lake, the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia, behaves unlike any other. Each year during the monsoon season, the Mekong River reverses its flow, flooding the lake and expanding it several times its dry season size. This natural phenomenon created one of the richest freshwater ecosystems on Earth. Fish, fertile soil, and natural irrigation supported large populations long before advanced engineering existed. Those who understood and managed water held power, not political power yet, but survival power. This knowledge became the invisible foundation upon which Angkor would later rise. Before kings, before empires, There were no emperors, no stone temples, no organized armies, but there were engineers of survival. For thousands of years, generations of farmers, fishers, builders, and storytellers shaped the land. They cleared forests, redirected water, preserved traditions, and passed down knowledge, unknowingly preparing the conditions for one of the greatest urban civilizations in human history. Angkor did not rise suddenly. It grew from deep time. In the next session, we will follow these ancient communities as they transform into a distinct people. We will explore how language, belief, territory, and leadership shaped identity, and how these Austro-Asiatic societies came to be known to history as the Khmer. Session 2. The birth of the Khmer people will reveal how culture and land fused into a civilization long before Angkor Wat's golden age. From communities to identity. By the end of the prehistoric era, the land that would one day be called Cambodia was no longer home to scattered survival groups alone. It was inhabited by organized communities tied together by shared language, belief, and territory. These people did not suddenly appear as Khmer. Identity formed slowly, over thousands of years, shaped by environment rather than conquest. Linguistic evidence shows that the ancestors of the Khmer spoke languages belonging to the Mon-Khmer branch of the Austroasiatic family. This makes the Khmer among the most ancient continuous cultural groups in mainland Southeast Asia. Unlike later populations who migrated into the region, these communities were indigenous. They did not replace earlier peoples. They were the earlier peoples evolving in place. Villages, chiefs, and early power. As populations grew between roughly 2000 and 500 BCE, villages expanded and social hierarchy began to emerge. Leadership was not yet divine or imperial. Early authority rested with village chiefs and elders, individuals who controlled land, water access, and ritual knowledge. Power was practical. Those who could organize labor to clear fields, manage irrigation, store rice, or protect the community gained influence. Over time, this influence became hereditary, forming the earliest local elites. Archaeological sites across Cambodia show evidence of settled life, burial customs, pottery styles, bronze tools, and early iron usage. These findings indicate trade networks connecting Cambodia to wider Southeast Asia. Belief before religion. Before Hinduism or Buddhism arrived, spiritual life already existed. Early Khmer belief systems centered on animism, the idea that spirits inhabit natural features such as trees, mountains, rivers, and stones. Ancestors were revered as protectors of the living, capable of blessing or cursing future generations. Mountains were seen as sacred pillars connecting earth and sky. Water was not just a resource, but a living force. These beliefs did not disappear with the arrival of Indian religions. Instead, they fused together, allowing later Khmer kings to rule not only as political leaders, but as sacred mediators between worlds. Trade, contact, and transformation. By the first millennium BCE, the region was no longer isolated. Maritime trade routes linking India, China, and Southeast Asia passed near the Cambodian coast and along the Mekong River. Traders did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived as merchants, priests, and scholars. With them came new ideas, writing systems, cosmology, political theory, religious philosophy. Local leaders adopted these ideas selectively. Indian influence did not erase Khmer culture, it reshaped it. This process, known as Indianization, was not colonization. No Indian armies ruled Cambodia. Instead, Khmer elites used foreign concepts to strengthen local authority, the sacred language of power. Sanskrit became the language of ritual and royalty, while Old Khmer remained the language of the people. This dual language system reflected a deeper truth. The Khmer were not becoming Indian, they were becoming more Khmer, using external tools to express local power. Stone inscriptions, beginning around the early centuries CE, reveal a society increasingly organized around kingship, land grants, and temple-centered authority. The foundations of statehood were forming, from identity to kingdom. By the early centuries of the Common Era, the Khmer were no longer just a people. They were a civilization in transition. Villages had become regional centers. Chiefs had become kings. Spiritual leaders had become priestly elites. The stage was set for the emergence of Cambodia's first true kingdom. In the next session, we will witness the moment when belief, power, and foreign ideas combine to create something entirely new. We will explore how sacred kingship emerged, how Hindu and Buddhist cosmology reshaped Khmer rule, and how the foundations were laid for Cambodia's first great civilization. Session 3. Indianization and the Rise of Sacred Kings. How belief became power and power became divine, a turning point in history. By the early centuries of the Common Era, the Khmer world stood at a crossroads. Its people were no longer isolated farming communities. Trade routes connected the Mekong Basin to India, China, and the wider Indian Ocean world. Along these routes traveled not only goods, but ideas. Ideas powerful enough to reshape how authority itself was understood. This was not an invasion. No foreign armies marched across Khmer lands. Instead, transformation arrived quietly, carried by merchants, monks, and scholars. What followed would permanently change Cambodian history. What Indianization really means. Historians describe this period as Indianization, but the term can be misleading. Indianization was not colonization. It did not involve political domination by India. Rather, it was a cultural and intellectual exchange in which local Southeast Asian rulers adopted selected elements of Indian civilization to strengthen their own authority. The Khmer adopted Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, concepts of kingship and law Sanskrit, as a sacred and royal language, astronomy, mathematics, and ritual architecture. But they did not abandon their identity. These ideas were reshaped to fit local belief systems already rooted in ancestor worship, animism, and sacred landscapes. The birth of sacred kingship. One idea above all others transformed Khmer society, the concept of divine kingship. In Indian political philosophy, a ruler was more than a leader. He was a protector of cosmic order, dharma. Khmer elites adapted this concept into something uniquely their own. The king was no longer merely a powerful man. He became a sacred figure, a mediator between humans and the gods. This belief did not replace earlier traditions. Instead, it merged with existing ideas of ancestral power and sacred land. The king became both ruler and ritual guardian, responsible for maintaining harmony between heaven, earth, and people. Temples before empires. The earliest temples in Khmer lands were not grand stone monuments like Angkor Wat. They were modest structures, brick and wood sanctuaries dedicated to Hindu deities such as Shiva and Vishnu. These temples were not only religious centers, they were political statements. To build a temple was to claim divine legitimacy. Inscriptions carved in Sanskrit recorded land donations, rituals, and royal genealogies. Through these texts, kings presented themselves as chosen protectors of cosmic balance. Old Khmer inscriptions, meanwhile, documented everyday administration, labor obligations, village boundaries, and resource control. Together, they reveal a society becoming increasingly centralized. The power of writing and law. Writing changed everything. Before inscriptions, power lived in memory and ritual. With writing, authority became permanent. Kings could now define borders, record ownership of land, establish laws backed by divine sanction. Stone inscriptions from the early centuries CE reveal an emerging legal system based on Indian models but adapted to Khmer realities. Justice was no longer personal, it was cosmic. To obey the king was to obey the order of the universe itself. Hinduism, Buddhism, and coexistence. Why Hinduism took root among the Khmer. When Indian religious ideas reached the Khmer world, Hinduism, especially Shaivism, was adopted first and most deeply by the ruling elites. This was not accidental. Hinduism offered something local belief systems did not yet fully provide: a complete political theology. In Hindu thought, the universe is ordered by dharma, cosmic law. Kings exist not merely to rule people, but to maintain cosmic balance. This idea aligned perfectly with existing Khmer beliefs that land, water, ancestors, and spirits must remain in harmony for society to survive. For Khmer leaders, Hinduism did three crucial things. First, it legitimized authority. A king could claim that his right to rule came from the gods, not from force alone. Second, it sacralized territory. Mountains, rivers, and land were no longer just resources. They were manifestations of divine order. Third, it made kingship eternal. A king was no longer just a man. He was the earthly representative of a universal principle. Shiva and the Khmer concept of power among Hindu deities, Shiva became central to Khmer political belief. Shiva was not only a god of destruction, he was also a god of creation, balance, and transformation. To Khmer rulers, Shiva represented controlled power, the ability to destroy chaos and restore order. This matched perfectly with the responsibilities of kingship. Kings identified themselves with Shiva through the linga, a sacred symbol representing divine energy and fertility. The linga was placed at the heart of temples, often atop sacred mountains or artificial mounds. When a king installed a linga, he was not simply worshipping a god. He was declaring himself the guardian of cosmic order. From ancestor spirits to god-kings before Hinduism, Khmer societies already believed that ancestors and spirits protected land and people. Hinduism did not erase this belief, it elevated it. The king became the most powerful ancestor. Through ritual, genealogy, and temple construction, rulers linked themselves to both divine gods and revered ancestors. Death did not end royal power, it transformed it. Deceased kings were worshipped as divine beings associated with specific temples. This is how power became eternal. Temples as engines of power. Khmer temples were not places of worship alone. They were economic, political, and ideological centers. Temples controlled land. Temples managed labor. Temples stored surplus. Temples enforced royal authority. By donating land and people to temples, kings expanded their influence while appearing generous and pious. Religion became administration. Administration became sacred. Buddhism enters the Khmer world. Buddhism entered Cambodia alongside Hinduism, particularly early Mahayana Buddhism. Unlike Hinduism, Buddhism did not focus on divine kingship. Instead, it emphasized compassion, moral behavior, and liberation from suffering. For this reason, Buddhism often appealed to common people rather than elites. Yet Buddhism was never rejected by Khmer rulers. Why? Because Buddhism offered moral legitimacy. A king who supported Buddhism could present himself not only as powerful, but as righteous. Why Hinduism and Buddhism coexisted. The Khmer worldview was fundamentally inclusive. Hinduism explained cosmic order. Buddhism explained human suffering. They did not compete, they complemented. Khmer kings supported both traditions when it strengthened their authority. Temples dedicated to Hindu gods stood beside Buddhist monasteries. This flexibility prevented religious conflict and allowed smooth ideological transitions centuries later, including Angkor's shift from Hinduism to Mahayana Buddhism. Belief becomes power. By merging Hindu cosmology with indigenous belief, Khmer rulers achieved something rare. They made political obedience a religious duty. To serve the king was to serve cosmic order. To rebel was to invite chaos. Power no longer relied solely on force, it relied on belief. Foundations of the First Kingdom. By the 1st to 5th centuries CE, Khmer society had been transformed. Local chiefs had become kings. Belief had become ideology. Ritual had become governance. The conditions were now in place for Cambodia's first true state-level civilization, a kingdom that Chinese chroniclers would soon record by name. In the next session, we will encounter that kingdom. Recorded in Chinese histories, enriched by trade, and ruled by sacred kings, it would become the first great civilization of Khmer history. Session 4, Funan, Cambodia's first recorded kingdom, trade, power, and the birth of a civilization known to the world. When Cambodia entered written history. For thousands of years, the ancestors of the Khmer lived, farmed, and ruled without leaving written records recognizable to the outside world. Then, around the beginning of the Common Era, Cambodia stepped onto the stage of global history. This moment came not through conquest, but through trade. Chinese diplomats and merchants traveling through Southeast Asia recorded the existence of a powerful kingdom located in the lower Mekong basin. They called it Funan. Funan was not a myth. It was the first Khmer civilization described in historical texts. Where was Funan? Funan was not a single city, but a network of settlements spread across what is now southern Cambodia and southern Vietnam, including the Mekong Delta. Its power came from geography. Situated between India and China, Funan controlled maritime and riverine trade routes connecting the Indian Ocean to East Asia. Ships carrying spices, metals, textiles, and luxury goods passed through Funanese ports. The kingdom prospered by facilitating exchange rather than dominating territory through warfare. The founding legend and its meaning. Chinese records preserve a legend about Funan's origin. According to these accounts, a local ruler named Liu Ye was defeated by a foreign Brahmin named Kaundinya, who arrived by sea and married a local queen. Together, they founded a new dynasty. Modern historians do not treat this story as literal fact. Instead, it symbolizes a deeper historical process, the merging of indigenous Khmer leadership with Indian religious and political ideas. Funan was born not from invasion, but from synthesis. Kings, temples, and authority Funan's rulers governed as sacred kings. They adopted Hindu rituals, Sanskrit titles, and cosmological symbolism to legitimize power. Temples became centers of worship, administration, and economic control. Land was granted to temples and elites, creating a system in which religious institutions reinforced royal authority. This model would later be perfected at Angkor. An economy of water and trade. Funan's wealth did not come only from overseas trade. Its rulers mastered water management long before Angkor. Canals were constructed to link rivers, settlements, and ports. These waterways allowed the movement of goods, people, and agricultural surplus. Rice farming supported large populations while fishing and trade added prosperity. Chinese envoys described Funan as wealthy, urbanized, and technologically advanced. Funan and its rivals. Funan did not exist alone. It interacted, and sometimes competed, with neighboring polities across Southeast Asia. While large-scale wars are not well documented, control of trade routes created tension. Funan's influence extended across the lower Mekong region, but its power depended on maintaining trade dominance. When that dominance weakened, so did the kingdom. Decline without collapse. By the 6th century CE, Chinese records note that Funan had lost power. This decline was not caused by sudden destruction, but by internal shifts and the rise of new regional powers. Funan gradually transformed into a new political order known as Chenla. The people did not disappear. The culture did not vanish. It evolved. In the next session, we will follow that transformation. We will explore Chenla, a land-based kingdom shaped by internal conflict, shifting capitals, and early wars that reshaped Khmer power. Session 5. Chenla. Division, conflict, and the road to Angkor from maritime power to inland kingdoms. The transformation after Funan. By the late 6th century CE, the world of Funan had changed. Trade routes shifted. Political centers moved inland. New elites rose to power. Chinese records no longer spoke of Funan as a dominant force. Instead, they described a new political landscape known as Chenla. Chenla was not a sudden revolution. It was the next stage of Khmer civilization, emerging naturally from Funan's decline. What was Chenla? Chenla was a land-based kingdom, or more accurately, a collection of Khmer polities, stretching across present-day Cambodia, southern Laos, and parts of northeastern Thailand. Unlike Funan, which thrived on maritime trade, Chenla drew its strength from agriculture, inland waterways, and land control. This shift marked a crucial turning point. Power was no longer tied primarily to ports and merchants. It was tied to land. Kingship without stability. Chenla inherited the sacred kingship ideology of Funan, but without the same economic unity. Kings ruled as divine figures, yet authority was fragmented. Regional rulers governed semi-independently, pledging loyalty when it suited them. This fragile structure made Chenla vulnerable to internal conflict. Royal succession was often disputed. Rival elites competed for land, labor, and ritual legitimacy. Land Chenla and Water Chenla Chinese sources describe Chenla as divided into two spheres. Land Chenla, centered inland, focused on agriculture and territorial control. Water Chenla, oriented toward river systems and remaining trade routes. Modern historians debate whether this division was political, geographic, or simply a Chinese interpretation of complex realities. What is clear is that Chenla lacked centralized authority. This division weakened the kingdom. Early wars and external pressure. Chenla faced growing pressure from neighboring powers. To the east, Champa, located in present-day central Vietnam, competed for influence and trade. To the north, Chinese dynasties asserted control over regional politics, demanding tribute and recognition. Military conflict during this period was frequent but poorly documented. What we know suggests localized warfare, raids, and shifting alliances, rather than large imperial campaigns. Temples, land, and control. Despite instability, Chenla rulers continued to build temples. These temples served as anchors of power. By controlling religious centers, kings controlled land, labor, and belief. Temple inscriptions reveal ongoing land grants, tax exemptions, and labor obligations. Even in chaos, the sacred model of authority endured, the seeds of Angkor. Ironically, Chenla's weakness created opportunity. As central authority fractured, ambitious leaders sought new ways to consolidate power. They looked to geography, to water, to scale. The idea of a unified empire, centered on massive water control and divine kingship, began to take shape. Session 6. The Rise of Angkor Jayavarman II and the Birth of an Empire, a World Ready for Unification. By the late 8th century CE, the Khmer world was fractured. Chenla's divisions had left the land vulnerable, politically unstable, regionally fragmented, and threatened by external influence. Yet within this instability lay possibility. The people, the belief systems, and the knowledge of land and water already existed. What was missing was a single authority strong enough to unite them. That authority would emerge in the form of one man, the return of Jayavarman. Historical inscriptions describe a ruler named Jayavarman II, who appeared in the late 8th century and moved across different regions of Khmer territory. Some inscriptions suggest that he had spent time in Java, then returned to the mainland. Whether this was exile, alliance, or political maneuvering remains debated. What is clear is that Jayavarman II returned with a new vision of kingship. He did not merely seek to rule. He sought to transform power itself. The Devaraja Ritual. In 802 CE, on Mount Mahendraparvata, modern Phnom Kulen, Jayavarman II performed a ritual that would redefine Cambodian history. Known as the Devaraja ceremony, it declared the king as a universal ruler, a god-king, independent from foreign authority. This was not a claim of personal divinity alone. It was a declaration of sovereignty. The king embodied Shiva. The land became sacred. The empire became a cosmic order. From this moment, the Angkorian state was born, unifying the Khmer lands. Jayavarman II spent years consolidating control over rival territories. Through military force, strategic alliances, and ritual authority, he unified disparate regions into a single political entity. This was not empire by conquest alone. It was empire by belief. Local rulers accepted Angkorian authority because it was presented as divinely ordained. Choosing the Angkor heartland. The Angkor region was not chosen by accident. Located near the Tonle Sap, it offered unparalleled agricultural potential. Seasonal floods enriched the soil, while rivers provided transportation and irrigation. Jayavarman II and his successors recognized that controlling water meant controlling people. The foundations of Angkor's vast hydraulic system were laid during this period. From ritual center to capital, early Angkor was not yet the city of stone temples we recognize today. It began as a ritual and administrative center, wooden palaces, brick temples and earthworks marking sacred space. But the vision was clear. Angkor would be permanent. Legacy of a founder, Jayavarman II did not live to see Angkor's full glory. Yet his legacy endured for centuries. He established a unified Khmer state, divine kingship as political ideology, the sacred connection between king, land and God. Every Angkorian king who followed ruled in his shadow. Session 7. Angkor Wat, meaning, power and purpose. The cosmic temple that shaped an empire, a monument. Unlike any other Angkor, what is often called the largest religious monument in the world, but its significance goes far beyond scale. Built in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, it was designed as a physical manifestation of the Khmer universe. Every element, from the layout to the towers, had symbolic meaning. The temple is a microcosm of Hindu cosmology. Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of the universe, is represented by the 5 central towers. The surrounding walls and moats symbolize the cosmic oceans that encircle the world. Hinduism made stone, and water. Angkor Wat was dedicated to Vishnu, one of the principal Hindu deities. Vishnu represents preservation and cosmic order, fitting for a king seeking both spiritual legitimacy and political control. The bas-reliefs depict legendary stories, from the churning of the ocean of milk to scenes of royal processions and battles. These were not just decoration, they were propaganda. They linked the king to divine forces and reinforced the ideology of sacred kingship. Engineering as power. Angkor Wat is as much an engineering marvel as a spiritual one. The temple complex sits at the center of an elaborate hydraulic system that controlled water for agriculture, ritual purification, and urban planning. By controlling water, the king controlled life itself. The landscape itself became a tool of political authority. The stone temple was built to last eternity, symbolizing that the king's power and the cosmic order he represented were permanent. Religion and legitimacy. Hindu belief was inseparable from royal authority. Constructing Angkor Wat demonstrated that the king could command both material resources and divine favor. Each ceremony, each offering, each ritual performed within its walls reinforced the sacred link between ruler and cosmos. This is how belief became power, and power became divine. A temple for the people and the gods. While primarily a royal and religious project, Angkor Wat was also central to society. It defined sacred geography, influenced settlement patterns, and centralized economic control. Farmers, artisans, and laborers contributed to its construction. In return, they were incorporated into a system where their daily lives were ritually and economically tied to the king's authority. The temple was both a spiritual and administrative hub. Legacy across centuries. Angkor Wat became a model for other Khmer temples. Its combination of sacred design, political symbolism, and hydraulic engineering defined the Angkorian approach to urban and spiritual planning. Even centuries later, it continues to embody Khmer identity, faith, and ingenuity. Session 8. Wars of the Angkor Empire, defending the kingdom and expanding influence. Challenges from neighbors. Despite the grandeur of Angkor and the divine authority of its kings, the empire faced constant threats from surrounding powers. To the east, Champa, a maritime kingdom in what is now central and southern Vietnam, repeatedly challenged Khmer control over coastal trade routes. To the north and northeast, Dai Viet, northern Vietnam, and later Thai states occasionally launched raids or exerted pressure on border regions. To the west and southwest, emerging Siamese powers tested Angkorian influence over the western Khmer provinces. These external pressures required strategic military campaigns and careful diplomacy, internal stability and rebellion. Angkor was not only threatened from outside. Internal rebellion was a recurring challenge. Regional governors or local rulers sometimes resisted central authority, challenging the divine kingship ideology. Maintaining unity required both military force and reinforcement of sacred authority through ritual, construction, and public ceremonies. Notable conflicts. Champa. Angkorian chronicles record several wars with Champa, often in retaliation for raids on Khmer territories or to assert dominance over trade routes. These conflicts could be devastating, involving large armies and sometimes the temporary loss of land. Jai Viet, raids from the north, pressured Angkorian borders. Though Jai Viet was often more focused on regional consolidation, incursions prompted Angkor to maintain fortified settlements and river defenses. Siamese states. The western region saw intermittent conflicts. Angkorian forces often used riverine routes and fortified positions to control the movement of rival armies. Military organization. Angkor's military relied on levees, canals, and fortified cities. Soldiers were often conscripted from local populations, with duties tied to the hydraulic and agricultural systems. The integration of labor, water management, and military service strengthened the link between civil infrastructure and defense, making the empire resilient despite repeated conflicts. Warfare and religion. Conflict was not purely secular. Kings often invoked divine sanction to legitimize campaigns. Victories were commemorated in inscriptions and temple reliefs, linking the king's military prowess to cosmic order and religious duty. Defeat, conversely, could be interpreted as a loss of divine favor, prompting ritual purification or construction projects to restore balance. Long-term impact. Wars shaped Angkor's geography and administration. Regions vulnerable to repeated attacks were fortified and integrated more directly under royal authority. Trade and tribute networks were adjusted to ensure resources for military and ritual purposes. Although conflict sometimes weakened the empire temporarily, they also reinforced the sacred kingship ideology and the importance of centralized planning. Session 9. The Fall of Angkor Decline, Environmental Stress, and Political Fragmentation, the Twilight of a Civilization. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Angkor had endured centuries of prosperity, conquest, and monumental building. Yet even the greatest empires can falter. A combination of internal and external pressures led to the gradual decline of the Angkor Empire. Environmental challenges. One of the most critical factors was the environment itself. Angkor's advanced hydraulic system had allowed massive agricultural production, but it also required constant maintenance. Droughts or excessive monsoon flooding could disrupt food production and strain the empire's administration. Archaeological and paleoclimatic studies indicate a series of prolonged droughts in the 14th century, followed by heavy flooding. These events weakened the economic base of the empire and created local food shortages. Political fragmentation. Central authority weakened as regional rulers asserted independence. Kings became less able to enforce tribute, conscript labor, and maintain infrastructure. Local elites increasingly governed autonomously. This fragmentation made the empire vulnerable to external attacks. Invasions and external pressure. Neighboring states, particularly Ayutthaya, Siam, and Champa, seized opportunities to raid Angkorian territory. Repeated invasions in the 15th century, combined with internal weaknesses, forced the royal court to move its center from Angkor to the south, near present-day Phnom Penh. The once great city of stone temples and canals gradually fell into ruin, though it remained a sacred symbol of Khmer kingship. Cultural continuity. Despite decline. Although political power shifted, Khmer culture endured. Religious practices, the concept of divine kingship, art, and architecture survived in the countryside and in new capitals. The memory of Angkor remained central to Khmer identity, inspiring later generations to reclaim and rebuild their cultural heritage. Lessons from Decline Angkor's Fall illustrates that empires are fragile despite monumental achievements. Environmental change, political fragmentation, and military pressure can converge to destabilize even the most sophisticated civilizations. Yet Angkor's knowledge of water management, sacred kingship, and urban planning did not disappear. It informed the survival and resurgence of Cambodia for centuries. Session 10. Angkor's Legacy, the Soul of Modern Cambodia. How the Angkor civilization continues to shape the nation from ruin to reverence. Although Angkor fell politically in the 15th century, its cultural, religious, and architectural legacy endured. The stone temples, reservoirs, and inscriptions were not forgotten. Local communities continued to worship at Angkor Wat and nearby temples, preserving rituals, stories, and sacred geography. Angkor remained a spiritual center, even as the political capital moved southward. Continuity of belief and kingship. The concept of divine kingship persisted. Later, Cambodian rulers continued to blend political authority with spiritual legitimacy, drawing on traditions established by Jayavarman Tso and his successors. Hinduism gradually receded, while Theravada Buddhism became dominant by the 16th century. Yet the fusion of belief and power established centuries earlier influenced governance, law, and ritual practice for generations. Angkor's influence on architecture and urban planning. The architectural and hydraulic innovations of Angkor continued to inspire settlements and infrastructure across Cambodia. Reservoir, canals, and temple layouts informed later city planning, while motifs from Angkorian art appear in Buddhist pagodas and royal palaces. The Angkorian model of integrating nature, water, and sacred space remains a hallmark of Cambodian design. National identity and cultural memory. Angkor Wat became a symbol of Cambodia itself. It is central to national identity, appearing on the flag and in literature, art, and film. Its history fosters a sense of continuity from ancient Khmer civilization to the present day, connecting modern Cambodians with their ancestors' achievements. Lessons for the present. The story of Angkor offers lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the power of belief. Even after environmental disasters, wars, and political decline, the Khmer people preserved their culture, language, and spiritual practices. Angkor reminds us that civilizations are not just built with stone. They are built with ideas, faith, and human ingenuity. Cambodia shares land borders with 3 countries. 1. Thailand, northwest and west. 2. Laos, north. 3. Vietnam, east and southeast. These borders have shaped much of Cambodia's history through wars, territorial disputes, and shifting alliances. 1. Thailand, Siam. Historical conflicts. During the Angkor Empire, 9th–15th centuries, there were repeated conflicts with the emerging Ayutthaya Kingdom of Siam. Notably, in 1431, Ayutthaya forces sacked Angkor, marking the end of Angkor as a political capital. In the 18th–19th centuries, there were smaller border conflicts over strategic western provinces, as Siam and Cambodia negotiated vassalage and territorial control. Reasons: control of fertile western territories, dominance over trade routes connecting the Gulf of Thailand and inland regions. 2. Laos historical conflicts, limited direct warfare. Most interactions involved shifting spheres of influence and border skirmishes rather than large-scale invasions. Laos often acted indirectly through alliances or as part of larger regional dynamics involving Siam and Vietnam. Impact: Laos did not significantly threaten Cambodia's core territories, but occasionally competed over northern borderlands. 3. Vietnam. Historical conflicts. From the 17th century onward, Vietnam's expansion southward, Nam Tien, brought it into the Mekong Delta, historically part of Cambodian territory. Cambodian rulers often became vassals to Vietnamese authority or fought to reclaim southern lands. During the Angkor period, Cambodia sometimes fought alongside or against Champa, whose territory overlapped with present-day central and southern Vietnam. Impact: Vietnam's influence led to centuries of tension in southern Cambodia, influencing culture, population, and politics. Summary of historical relations. Most conflicts. Thailand, Siam, and Vietnam. Limited conflicts. Laos. Nature of wars. Territorial expansion. Control of trade. Vassalage disputes and occasional direct invasions. So, in conclusion, from the dawn of humanity along the fertile Mekong to the towering stone spires of Angkor Wat, Cambodia's history is a story of resilience, ingenuity, and belief. We began with the earliest settlers, whose knowledge of rivers, forests, and rice cultivation laid the foundation for a civilization yet to come. These people became the Khmer, the ancestors of modern Cambodia, developing culture, language, and identity that would endure for millennia. Through the influence of Indianization, Hinduism and Buddhism became intertwined with political authority. Belief became power, and power became divine. A concept crystallized in the sacred kingship of Funan, Chenla, and finally Angkor. Temples were not mere buildings. They were instruments of governance, spiritual centers, and symbols of cosmic order. Funan's maritime trade and Chenla's inland consolidation demonstrate how Cambodia adapted to changing environments and regional dynamics. Wars with Champa, Siam, and Vietnam tested the strength of the empire, shaping its borders, politics, and strategy. Even in conflict, Khmer rulers used religion, ritual, and infrastructure to maintain authority. The rise of Angkor under Jayavarman II marked a new era. With the Devaraja ritual, kings became divine, unifying land, people, and faith. Angkor Wat, Suryavarman II's masterpiece, stands as both an architectural marvel and a spiritual testament, a microcosm of the universe, where stone, water, and devotion merged into a system of eternal power. Yet even the greatest empires face fragility. Environmental disasters, political fragmentation, and foreign invasions eventually led to Angkor's decline. But the cultural memory endured. Buddhism became dominant, yet sacred kingship, hydraulic ingenuity, and Khmer artistry survived, influencing Cambodia for centuries. Today, Cambodia's identity is inseparable from its past. Angkor remains a symbol of resilience, faith, and human creativity. Its story teaches us that civilizations are built not only with stone, but with ideas, belief, and the courage to endure. From prehistoric settlers to Angkorian grandeur, from wars and decline to cultural rebirth, Cambodia's history is a timeless journey, a living narrative of humanity, power, and spirituality. This is Cambodia, ancient, magnificent, and eternal. Thank you for watching. See you in the next country's history. May God bless you.